Hey, Julie, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Uh, it's 2020. I'm hanging in there.
Oh, yeah.
Um, some of our good friends are helping our panelist Francisco join us, but I think in honor of the people waiting and the huge import of what we're doing, we should get started, trusting that when Francisco joins us, the party will get even better. We agreed?
Yes.
Agree for sure.
So I'd like to start, Henry, with you. Um, Something really important to the world is what brings us here today. An announcement that you and others made in the last couple of days and hours. Um, that is unusual in a lot of ways. And I'd like you to tell us what that was, but in the form of addressing this question. Our long professional association and friendship has caused me to hear you use a phrase many times that I think is important to starting this conversation. So, in the context of explaining what brings us here today, can you explain to our audience what catalytic philanthropy is?
No, I appreciate that, Jeff. When we talk about catalytic philanthropy, it's really honing in on what we collectively believe is the best and highest use of philanthropy. And that's with the recognition that even in the context of today, when we know how devastating the impacts of the COVID-19 crisis have been on school systems and having a disproportionate impact, particularly on students of color and students that are impacted by poverty, that problem is so large and so systemic that the core approach to solving for that has to be through the public sector. And there are things that philanthropy can assist with, and we have and should. But one of the key roles for philanthropy is being able to put some capital at risk, looking around the corner to try to work with the field to think about how to address problems in different ways, in ways that potentially is first money into certain areas, potentially helps invest in areas that bring other capital and focus onto a given issue in ways that allow folks to follow where that initial capital that can take different risks can go. And we think that that's a really critical role for philanthropy beyond kind of just direct assistance, but also really being strategic and thinking about places where we can work with the field in ways that public sector dollars, are when they're directed toward other more urgent, important things like the basics of responding to the COVID-19 crisis,
Right.
knowing that some of the challenges that presents, we're not even going to fully feel the effects of and understand for a couple of years. And so it's critical to be thinking about that.
So I think you're absolutely right. And that approach to philanthropy is one that has characterized your philanthropic career and also undergirds the announcement from this week. So if I have a friend who has been thinking hard about how Blacks, Latinos, and kids impacted by poverty experience Algebra 1, can you describe for me a mechanism by which they might get funding to turn their idea into reality?
Listen, I appreciate the meatball pitch, and what you are alluded to is the grand challenge that the Gates Foundation just announced yesterday called Balance the Equation, which is specifically about looking for breakthrough solutions to improve Algebra 1 outcomes for Black students, Latino students, and those students impacted by poverty. And very specifically, it's a two-stage process by which we are canvassing the field and hoping in the broadest tent possible, folks that work deeply in education, folks that are adjacent to education, folks that are practitioners, researchers, developers, innovators, coming together to respond to the proposal. And ultimately, we'll be giving away up to $1 million to 10 different teams. And that focus is very specifically thinking about how we bring together the best of what the field knows and understands around innovation, but with an equity focus, and the best of what the field knows and understands around how important the question of student identity and student experience is, deeply intertwined with all of the ways that we think about teaching and learning, and directly impact outcomes for those priority students. So really trying to find that powerful intersection between how we think about equity and focus on student identity and naming those students and the power of the experiences that they bring into the classroom, and addressing bias with the power of what we know innovation can do, and really seeing what we come up with as a field. We're excited about that. It's wide open.
That's great. Up to 10 winners of up to $1 million each. That's a serious investment. I thought I saw Francisco join us, and I was going to give him fair warning that I was going to bring him up to the stage, but maybe he's still trying to join us fully, and I'll keep watching there. Something that I noticed about your announcement this week, and obviously I was referring to this Algebra 1 announcement, also really struck me, was that announcement made it clear that you were focusing in particular on particular students, on Black students, on Latino students, on students who are being impacted by poverty, and students who speak languages other than English.
That's right.
I think lots of philanthropy tends to take a, all students matter kind of approach to things. So I was especially interested in the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation having chosen to name particular targets for that work. Some people think that when you do that, you are excluding other students. I know that you and your colleagues at Gates agree with me that kind of focus actually ends up helping everybody. I wonder if you would talk just a little bit about that philosophy, that approach, and your decision to do that.
Yeah, no, it is very much a theory of action that that states that the way we typically design these solutions and implement them and define what quality means in a much more plain to the middle universalist approach is clearly not meeting the needs of those students that are furthest from opportunity. And fundamentally what we're saying is that what really happens for those students is when you think about something like math, and we'll be specific about Algebra 1 in this challenge, writ large, there are all these broader issues around how we hold math in society. Who's a math person? Why one would want to and need to pursue excellence in understanding in math, and ultimately who has pathways open to them. And that's true for everyone, where sometimes math is kind of held up in this kind of almost religious, only certain folks have access to that knowledge, and that creates a broader issue around how all students access opportunity and outcomes in math. But when you combine those broader issues around math with the issues that pertain to bias related to students that have particular identities that are furthest from opportunity based on who they are and based on how the education system views them, when you combine those two, you end up with particularly devastating impacts on those students. And so what we're really saying is, if you focus in on those students and address some of the core issues at that intersection of, broadly, we have challenges in how we think about and teach and learn math, and broadly, we have issues around how we view students of color and their worthiness in education. If you solve for that, you ultimately solve for the same exact challenges that other folks that do not have those same student identities, but are still deeply impacted by the broader concerns around access and mastery of math. And what we're ultimately saying is like, this is the hypothesis that the other way is hard to do. Play to the average and then hope you can implement toward particular students who have specific needs. We're saying understand those specific needs, and by design, you're going to actually unlock outcomes for everyone.
I really like that approach to your philanthropy. That's wonderful. Francisco, we are very glad you have joined us here. The party can really get started. The Partnership for Los Angeles Schools is in the house. Henry, as we spend just a little bit more time on this grand challenge that has brought us here, I'm also impressed by how you all did this. I was involved a little bit in helping to put it together. I know Dr. Washington was involved. I know Francisco was involved, because you didn't just put money out there and say, here, try stuff. You actually developed this idea with people in the classrooms, with expert scholars, and I think most importantly, with students. Could you talk a little bit about the way this challenge has been framed? Because I want to make sure that if there are any other philanthropists in the room today or watching us later, that they understand how to do this right. Because I think you all got it right when you did it this time.
Yeah, so let me give full credit to the amazing team that we have at the Gates Foundation that came up with this methodology that was specific around engaging cross sections of the broader education community, including students, researchers, educators, developers of things, in order to before even like over defining what it was we ought to be looking for, actually hone in on the needs of those students with folks that were closest, that were most proximate to their context, including themselves, to really understand how they were making connections between who they were as individuals and their identities and teaching and learning of math. And so we started there and then framed up, some of the broader issues that seemed to be bubbling up from the sector. And that was really the basis of how the challenge was framed. And even in engaging the field in that way, what we were hoping to do was lay a pathway to build a tent that was broader than even the Gates Foundation might have historically built it, and certainly how philanthropy has historically built it, and actually engage folks who are often most proximate to students and understand what some of the solutions might look like, but may not be thinking about them or operating those things at scale or thinking about themselves as innovators. And likewise, bringing in incredible communities of innovators who are constantly thinking about the use of different techniques from other sectors and applying technology and other approaches, but often do not view themselves as appropriately focused on equity and are currently trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to design for equity being an innovator? And so figuring out how to first start with that community with the intention of inviting that breadth of community into the challenge and hoping that some of those different parts of the communities actually combine together in interesting ways in the responses.
It's a beautiful thing. So, Henry, you know that I could talk to you about this all day long. We've proven that more than once, over the course of our
we came here to hear Dr. Washington.
But I was about to say, we have some other folks here.
And Francisco as well as the practitioner. Thank you.
Francisco, we want to make sure you get fully involved in the conversation. If you look up above our heads, you'll see a camera and a microphone. If you click on the microphone, it'll unmute you. Right up above, you'll see it there. But while you're doing that, I have long thought that a part of the reason that Algebra 1 in particular has been such a barrier for students is that students who love math in elementary school get to algebra and suddenly have difficulty talking about the math that they are doing, putting into words the why of what they are doing. And I've always had this suspicion that the language of math was an issue. So imagine my delight at being able to ask a question of one of the foremost scholars of language acquisition on the planet about why she is involved in an Algebra 1.
I'm still trying to answer that question, but
So, Julie, can you talk about language, and especially for students of color, Black students and Latino students in particular, why language, when you reach the abstractions of Algebra 1, become especially important in achieving the success we want them to have?
well, I consider myself a developmentalist. So language is a problem before students get to algebra,
Okay.
which is why language is a problem when they get to algebra.
Okay.
And so many years ago now, we decided as a community in math that we needed for students not to be able to just work problems, but to understand what they're doing and be able to talk about it in a critical way. And when we did that, we lost a lot of students because we didn't understand how the linguistic piece would be so difficult. And in education, I think we have some sense that if you're an English learner, so you're coming from Spanish or Chinese or another language, that there's a language barrier, but we don't think about within language variation. And so that's what we're dealing with students of color who are African American and who are native speakers of American English, that those students come to school with a linguistic system that differs from the language of literacy. And so managing language in school becomes an issue for them, especially in written contexts, which is what math is. And we also know that for those students that when we talk about math and you talk about language, I hear people talk about math language a lot. They always talk about vocabulary. Vocabulary, of course, is an issue. You need to know what equation means. You need to know what a numerator and a denominator are. But we forget about the syntax of mathematics. So the sentence structure, the ability to do the critical thinking and get to the heart of the matter by understanding the linguistic piece of math. And so I was delighted to be asked to be involved in this because I spend all my time like a fly saying, don't forget about language. Don't forget about language. Don't forget about language. Just about working on a problem. It's about being able to understand, and especially in algebra, by the time you get to algebra, we've stopped seeing, 25 over 72, and we start seeing these longer language-based math problems that students really have difficulty with. And I believe with our students of color in particular, that a lot of students get to the algebra point and they get math, but they don't always get the instructions and what it is they're being asked to do, and then moving into doing the problem. It is not about the skills always. A lot of times it's about access to the problem because of the linguistic nature of math. Math is considered a language, which is something people don't always realize, that when we talk about language, we talk about verbal language, nonverbal language, and math. Because language is a symbol system that's agreed upon by a community. And that's what math is.
So among the many, many things that I have taken from your scholarship, let's now, and that I eventually stop attributing to you so people think I'm smart by myself.
Okay.
Let's add that math is a language and that the syntax of that language makes a big difference. I really think that is the kind of insight that this grand challenge, that this moment is supposed to surface so that we get something that is not traditional, that is not expected, that is
Yep.
not from within one domain. I think Henry did this on purpose, inviting you into the conversation to make sure that this thing kind of happens there too. So, Henry, I'm going to come back to you and really hoping that Francisco is able to join us again later. I read a brilliant piece in the 74 late last evening about a really successful professional African-American man who was talking about his own struggles with the math ecosystem. Since you are that the author of that brilliant piece and the successful African-American man.
And the only way that happens is if the adults in that situation already had some pretext, at least in their head, of what I ought to be capable for. So that one particular test just validated that. And it ended up putting me into that class. And like every few weeks, we take a test and the teacher would look at me like, why are you in this class? And then they move it to the next class. A few weeks, take another test, do fine on it. Why are you in this class? By the time I did that multiple times, I finally made it into the class I should have been in at the beginning of the school year, but I'd missed an entire year of math development. And like, I felt that, like that rode with me for a while. And I ultimately overcame it with a lot of support from my parents who really deeply advocated for me. I ended up transitioning schools and, ultimately ended up going to college and grad school and studying chemical engineering, have two degrees in engineering. None of that would have happened if my parents had not so deeply engaged and understood what was going on. And even then, I almost fell through the cracks. Even then, and had nothing to do with my actual ability. And so, for me, recognizing how that type of tracking actually works every day, based on my own experience,
That's right.
Very much helped inform how we think about this work.
Francisco, can you hear me now? Can we hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Great. I'm so glad we hear you. You are with us in the conversation. Henry was just telling us about his experience with mathematics that we all read in the 74 as an African-American boy growing up and not having the best experience with the math infrastructure of his school there. I know that yours is a distinct but also very relevant story as well. I wonder if you will join us in this conversation by telling us a little bit about your journey to this conversation about mathematics and how it's impacted by your personal story and the stories of the students you serve in Southern California.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that, Jeff. So one of the things that I always think about is when I'm thinking about this specific grant is that I was an English language learner. I was living in generational poverty. I'm a Latino, grew up in South Los Angeles and Boyle Heights. And although my family moved around a lot, I was tested into GATE at the age of 7. And for me, what that did was it opened up a lot of opportunities. When I moved from school to school, I was always placed in classrooms with pretty strong teachers. And I was always offered the opportunity to engage in enrichment opportunities after school, during lunch, during recess, in the morning. And when I think about the experience that my brothers had, it was drastically different. And they didn't graduate from high school. They still are living in the vicious cycle of poverty. And for me, the difference maker was really that one test and the fact that I was administered the test and that it opened up so many opportunities for me. And for me, the journey to education really came from there. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I loved sea life, but seeing the experiences that my brothers had and how it impacted their lives really drove me into education. And I said, we have to change this narrative. It can't be that just because a test there's a choice that's made about giving a kid a test or not, and that impacts the the quality of education and the experiences that they're having in school. And so when I think about the work that I do now, I work in the communities that I grew up in, and I think about the access that students have to just high quality education, regardless of what tests they've been given or not. That all students deserve a high quality education. And so a lot of my work really involves supporting teachers, right? Because if we want our teachers to believe in our students, we have to believe in them, and we have to invest in them just the way that we want them to invest in our kids.
It also sounds like, to me, Francisco, that your having been labeled gifted early probably helped to convince you that you were gifted.
Right.
Probably helped to convince you that you could handle things that other people from where you come from were not handling. That notion of identity feels really powerful. Am I getting that right?
Absolutely. When I thought about my experience, when I think back to my experience in school and the experience that my siblings were having, it was very different. My brothers would come home from school and they didn't want to do their work, and they would say things like, "I hate school," or "This teacher doesn't like me," or the experience was really bad. They always felt like they weren't being successful, whereas I always had my identity being built up, and a lot of it had to do with once you start having some success, the feedback that you begin to get is always positive, right? But when you begin to not do well in school, then the feedback that you get is always negative. And that has a huge impact on your identity and how you see yourself as a doer of mathematics, if you will, right? Or as a student. And I always saw myself as highly capable. I always saw that people were there to support me and that they would wrap supports around me. But I didn't see that for my brother. So I know that identity plays a huge role in how we see ourselves and the effort and the motivation that we have to do well in school.
Julie, I know that this notion of who gets to be seen as a mathematician is also important. And I could add my story to Henry's and Francisco's, but I want to make sure that we think a little bit about the particular experience that girls have of mathematics, especially Latinas and African-American girls. And since we are friends, and I know that you are not only a graduate of Spelman College, an amazing women's college in Atlanta, but if memory serves, you are also a graduate of a girls' high school in the Catholic education system. So I'm willing to bet that you have a lot to say about identity formation for girls and women around mathematics in this too. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Yes. And this is an interesting conversation because for each one of us, the path we ended up on started with a test. And I was somewhere between these two. I was in a public school in Seattle, and for me, it was a reading test. I took the test. I scored so high that they thought I cheated. And so they made me take it again. And once you've seen a test once, you only get better at it. And so then I scored even higher still. And they thought there's no way this little black girl could be doing this well. And so they made me take it again. And so I took it 3 times before they finally believed it. And then after that, all of the subjects that depended on reading, I wasn't really involved with, because they didn't know what to do with me, they said. So I was taking math and science only. And my mother figured it out and sent me to a private school. And one of the things about same-sex education for me is there is a gender gap in math in this country. And in a same-sex school, there is no gender gap. Everybody who's good at math is a girl. And then when you go to college, everybody who's good at math is a woman. And so there's none of this, guys are better at math, boys are better at math. It is that we're all women, all girls, and there are some people who are really talented at math. But it goes back to Francisco's issue about identity and about your the expectations for you that help to determine how good you think you are at things and whether you can succeed at them. And so because I was in these environments where it was, well, of course you can do it. Of course girls can do this. By the time I got to graduate school and went to a co-ed school, where people didn't expect me to be good at STEM. I didn't believe them anymore, in the same way that Francisco didn't believe them, because by the time I got there, I had already been so successful that I knew that their prejudices and biases about my ability were their problem, not my problem. But it really was about teachers. Teachers really matter. They really matter in terms of who you think you are, where you think you can go, and whether you're going to get there. And we don't think about them with mathematics as gatekeepers, but that's what they often are. That they are the people who decide whether you're going to go forward or not, unless you have parents who are advocating for you. And I'm a boy mom. I have 2 Black sons, and I was the advocate for them. When
one of them a math major, right?
One of them is a mathematician, he's an actor and an engineer, and now a public health guy. But when he was in high school, he said, "Mom, I think I need for you to come to school." And so I went to school, and it was the math director who told him he couldn't take calculus, even though he spent the summer taking pre-calculus in preparation for it. And I had to fight with this guy to get my son into math. And if I had not been willing to go like Henry's parents, if I had not been willing to go to bat for him, he would not have a math degree or an engineering degree. He would believe that it was beyond his ability, and it would have stopped him. So this idea that in the educational system, we can either be catalysts or we can be the gatekeepers that keep people from moving forward is oh so real. It is so real.
I absolutely believe that. My own mother has been known to say that schools are like nursing homes. They don't treat your people right unless you show up unannounced every once in a while.
Hey.
Those kinds of advocates who have made all the difference in the lives of the 4 people having this conversation, were important to forming our self-identities of who we are and bringing us to this moment, which is why I hope that one or more of the winners of this grand challenge is going to be somebody who figures out a way to make the educational system an advocate for building that kind of self-identity. Someone who leans into that. That's who I want to win one of these awards. I wonder, Francisco and Julie, if you have some ideas about who you want to win. I won't ask you, Henry.
Well, listen,
that might be a conflict.
Based on this conversation, I kind of feel like someone needs to come up with some solution that includes a manifestation of the mom who's not having it. Like figure out how to capture the mom who's not having it and bring that into a scalable solution.
That's right. We can call that program Mama Luck, but that's another story. But anyway, Julie, who do you want to win this? What do you want to see innovated and brought into being as a result of this grand challenge?
Well, I worry about the student who doesn't have the mother, who's there doing what my mother did and what our parents did. That student needs for the school, as you said, to be that person or to be empowered personally, to be that person for themselves and to self-advocate. I personally want to see only someone who considers the intersectionality of poverty, math, gender, get this award. Have to consider it all. You don't just get to do one or the other. You have to consider all of those variables, how they intersect with each other. So I want to see gender. I want to see poverty. I want to see language. I want to see it all in every grant. You may be approaching it a different way, but they have to intersect. Because one of the things I think we do in science is that we figure out pieces of questions. And so we study them in silos. And so we end up with a piece over here, a piece over here, and a piece over there, but nobody knows how to integrate it. And so if integration is part of the answer from the beginning, that's what I would like to see.
That's great. And Francisco, what do you want to see in Boyle Heights in a year that's not there now, that maybe happened to be there because of this generous grand challenge?
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry,
Yes,
you're muted.
Uh,
There you are.
all right. It's very similar to Dr. Washington. The things that Dr. Washington is describing is the things that I want to see. And I'd like to also offer it like a perspective, just zooming out and thinking about I think about like the likelihood of success and scalability, because this is an opportunity that will be available for some, but the solutions that come out of it should be things that we can scale at large to impact, like Dr. Washington said, to impact kids who don't necessarily have the mom coming to the school to advocate for them, right? The systems and the structures in place should do just that, should provide access to all students. So when I think about those things, I think about like a clear vision and solution, and for a clear vision for the solution and its impact, a plan for addressing the adult culture, because those things are important, the systems and the structures that are going to be in place. And I think about like change management. Those things are really important when we're thinking about implementing something new at the systems level. And lastly, I want to see teachers at the table to be developing some of these solutions. I think so often, solutions are drafted at a very high level, and then when it comes to implementation, they fall apart. And part of it is because we're not including teachers in the process.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to the details of this grand challenge a little bit as we begin to close up here. Henry, I see old friends like Sandro Oliveri in our audience, and I see David Savage, who works for a great math company, and lots of others there. Can you remind us what all these people need to do to make sure that everyone in their network is aware of this grand challenge, is aware that we are looking for unusual people to come to the table with their unusual ideas? Talk to us about what those folks should be doing.
Yes. So I think you'll see in the chat where my colleague Karen Johnson has dropped in a link to the webpage for the Grand Challenge. It's k12education.gatesfoundation.org/balance-the-equation. Go there and you'll see a video which really neatly captures the spirit of the challenge, and you'll find the details, including the specific areas that we are interested in seeing some innovation around. So go there and you'll find all the information that you need to be able to apply.
That's great.
And add that to all of your social media, whether you decide to respond or not, for anyone who deeply cares about this intersection of equity and innovation around Algebra 1.
I'm glad you said that, Henry. I really want everyone to take that to heart. I look at the list of people who are participating, and I see members of EdLock, Education Leaders of Color. You should make sure that everybody in EdLock is fully aware of this. I and Henry and Julie are all proud founders of Innovation for Equity, a group of African-American leaders in the education space who think about Black students as a part of our collective activity. We will make sure that everyone in Innovation for Equity is aware of this too. Please help us get the word out. Please help us make sure that people who might be thinking that they are not invited to this conversation know that Henry Hibb said that they are. That people who don't have a mom to advocate for them the way that ours have, who haven't been identified by the school as gifted, also recognize that they are a part of this conversation too. I believe very strongly that nobody is born a math person. That math is a skill that can be taught, that excellence in mathematics is the reward for hard work, and hard work comes when you believe that you can be a mathematician. So join me, everyone, in thanking this amazing panel for this conversation, bumps in the road and all, about this critical subject. Algebra 1 is a great place to start, making sure that mathematics is a gateway and not a barrier, making sure that all of us see ourselves as mathematicians, make sure that every student, especially Black students, Latino students, students impacted by poverty, and students whose first language is not English, believe that they are, like Francisco Villegas, gifted from age 7 and destined to have a big impact on the world. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. Let's do this again real soon.
Thank you all. This was great. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.